After discussing the different capital budgeting techniques in our previous video, this time we are going to talk about the relevant cash flows related in the capital budgeting techniques. Okay, so when we say relevant cash flows, these are the incremental cash outflows or cash inflows, no? When we say incremental, okay, we are basically talking about the additional cash flows that are related, no? Related in the proposed capital expenditures. When we say related, they are directly attributable to the proposed capital expenditure. Okay? When we say incremental, we are basically talking about the additional cash flows. Okay? It could be cash inflow or cash outflow. Ayun. Ganun lang po siya kadali. Three kinds. Okay? You have the initial cash investment, the operating cash inflows, and the terminal cash flow. Okay, so we have an example later, no? But let's just try to define, no? When we say initial investment, these are the cash flows. Most of the time, these are cash outflows, okay, happening at the beginning of the investment period, okay? Or yung sinasabi natin na time zero. Yan. Pag sinabi nating operating cash inflows, okay, these are the incremental, take note, incremental or additional cash inflows that happen during the implementation of the project, okay? And when we say terminal cash flows, they happen at the end, no, at the end of the project, okay, or in the final year. Now, take note, okay, at the end of the life of the project, okay, there may also be operating cash inflows. Take note, the operating cash inflows is different from the terminal cash flow. Okay, the terminal cash flow is normally attributable to the liquidation of the project, while the operating cash inflow is attributable, no, in the use of the asset. Okay po. Initial investment normally is an outflow at the beginning, but sometimes, no, it really depends on the problem. Okay, there may be some cash outflows related to the investment, no, happening during its life. Okay, and if that's the case, we still have to get the present value of that, no? So, ayun, like for example, renewal of a franchise, okay, which is not an operating expenditure, but it's related to the investment of the franchise. So, ayun, okay? To summarize, tatlo lang. Initial investment, operating, and terminal. We have here the example, okay, of the three. You have here your initial investment. Nangyayari yan sa umpisa, your $50,000, okay? And then you have your operating. These are your operating cash flows and your terminal cash flow. Ito yung sinabi ko kanina, no, that at the end of its life, there may be some operating cash flows, no. Ito yung 10,000, okay? And we have to distinguish the two. Okay, magkaiba po yan. This one has something to do with the liquidation. This one has something to do with the operation or the use of the asset. Okay po. Now, when we talk about investment, gaya ng sinabi ko kanina, normally we have one initial cash outflow, no? Pero sometimes there are some renewal, kunyari, related to the investment. Like, for example, okay, if we're talking of franchise, let's say it's renewable every after 3 years. So, meron ka pang renewal fee dito, assuming na i-renew natin siya. Okay, so every 3 years. Okay, so yung mga ganun bagay, kailangan din nating i-consider. Okay po, let's start with the meron pa pala. Okay, we also have to distinguish the difference of expansion projects and replacement projects. Okay, ito pinakamadali, no, yung expansion, because you simply acquire the asset, okay? Normally during expansion projects, okay, the capacity will be increased, okay? Pag hindi man capacity, magiging mas productive ka. And then your existing capacity will not be affected. Okay? For replacement decision naman, kay we have to add a new asset and then meron tayong ililiquidate. Kaya medyo magiging magkaiba yung cash flows ng mga yon. So let's just try to read this. Sabi, developing relevant cash flows estimates is most straightforward in the case of expansion decision. Mas madali siya sa expansion. I'll show you later kung bakit. In this case, the initial investment operating cash inflows, terminal cash flows, okay, are merely the after-tax cash outflows and inflows associated with the proposed capital expenditure. Now, identifying relevant cash flows for replacement decisions is more complicated kay when it comes to replacement. Yan. At para ma-visualize natin yan, we have here an illustration. Okay. Balik tayo. Anong nangyari doon? Ayun. By the way, before I forget, this material actually came from the materials that I gave you in your Canvas. Okay? These are slides coming from Gitman. Ayan, ginamit ko lang. No? If you want to see the full version, it's found in our module. Pero eto, I just want to highlight some things para mas maintindihan natin. Ayan. For expansion, these are your relevant cash flows. Your initial investment will only be composed of the investment coming from the acquisition of the new asset. For your operating cash inflows will come from your inflows coming from your new asset. And for terminal cash flows, ayan, galing din sa new asset yan. But for replacement, okay, the initial investment, operating cash inflows, and the terminal cash flow will come from the difference, okay, of the following items. No, for initial investment, it's the cost of the new asset, and then the after-tax cash inflows from the liquidation of an old asset. Okay, so nakita niyo yung difference, no? For expansion, bumili ka, then that's your cash outflow. For replacement, bumili ka, that's your cash outflow, but that will be reduced by the inflows coming from the sale of the old asset. Okay, so ayun, very straightforward. Pagdating sa operating cash inflow, for expansion, it's just the inflows coming from the new asset. But if you're going to replace, we also have to consider the inflows, the operating cash inflows coming from the old asset. Okay, so you have to get the difference. Yun yung sinasabi natin na incremental. Okay, so yung difference. Ayan. Sir, bakit kailangan pa siyang i-deduct? Okay, take note when you go to other subject, like for example, MS, your relevant cost is always the avoidable cost. Okay, and ano yung avoidable? Okay, things that change, so kung ano yung nabago coming from your decision, diba? That is now your action number, and action number 3, only what changes counts. Ayan. And then for terminal cash flow, ganun din, Okay, the terminal cash flow will come from the after-tax cash flow from termination of the new asset less the after-tax cash flow from termination of the old asset. Okay, so ayun, reviewin natin. Ito pag expansion, ito kapag replacement. Yan lang naman yung topic natin, parang tapos na tayo, di ba? Pero sige, let's look at the format mamaya. Ito, meron pa pala. What are sunk cost and opportunity costs? Pag sinabi nating sunk cost, these are irrelevant costs. They are historical. They are out-of-pocket costs that are already incurred. So, ibig sabihin, if they are already incurred, they are unavoidable. Therefore, they are irrelevant in decision making. Okay, for opportunity costs naman, actually these are not costs These are actually benefits that are foregone by choosing another alternative, Like for example, you should be, let's say, kunyari working student ka. Ayan, you should be earning right now, at this very moment, pero hindi, you chose to attend the class. Ganon, or you chose to absent, and work on your modules, so nasayang yung overtime pay mo siguro, or nasayang yung salary mo. Then that one, Okay, it's a benefit, but it was foregone by choosing another action or another alternative. That is now an example of your opportunity cost. Okay, so let's have an example. Okay, coming from the same material from Gitman. Janko Equipment is considering renewing its drill press, okay, which it purchased 3 years earlier for $237,000. Okay, so how do you classify this? This one is considered as a sunk cost. Why? Because it's historical. It's already incurred. Any decisions will not consider, no? Will not consider 237,000. Kung ano mang decision ang gagawin natin ngayon. And the obsolete equipment could be sold today for a high bid of 42,000, but without its computerized control system, it would worth nothing. Okay, so it would be worth nothing. Ano yung 42,000 na yan? Okay, this one is an example of opportunity cost, no? So if you decided, no? If you will decide, ganun na lang, para future tense. If you will decide to sell this, no, with its computerized control system, then meron kang 42,000, okay? Pero kung wala, hindi kasama yung computerized system or kung hindi mo siya ibebenta, then wala kang 42,000. So, pwede nating iwasan tong 42,000, therefore it's relevant. Since it's a benefit that could be foregone, ayan, it is considered as an opportunity cost. Okay, so doon na tayo sa meat of our discussion, starting with the first relevant cash flow. You have your initial investment. How do we compute for the initial investment? Okay, normally for expansion decisions, no, it will only be composed of this item right here, your installed cost of the new asset, plus or minus any change in the net working capital. But for replacement, okay, isasama natin ito. Okay, etong part na ito yung after-tax proceeds from sale of new asset. Okay, so what is the installed cost? That is the cost of the new asset plus any installation cost or any directly attributable cost yan needed for the asset to operate. Pag minsan dyan na rin sinasama yung mga relevant transportation cost, no? Okay, so ayun, kasama lahat yun doon sa installed cost of the new asset. Okay, so yun lang po. Okay, if you are going to replace an old asset and then that old asset will be sold, then you should consider the after-tax proceeds from the sale of the old asset. Let me explain this, no? Bakit siya after-tax? So you have your proceeds from the sale of the old asset, ayan. And then you have to consider whether it's sold at a gain or loss. Because if it's sold at a gain, no? For example, you have the asset at book value. No, masyadong madilim ang red. Mag-yellow nga tayo. Ayan. Let's say the asset has a book value of, let's say, 90,000. Okay. And then it was sold. No? It was sold, let's say, for 100,000. Then you will have a gain. No, gain from the disposal, which is 10,000 pesos. Now, let's just assume, no? Kasi magkakaiba ang capital gains tax, no? Gain from operation. You know, may mga gain yan coming from the recovery of an asset, assets depreciation. So, yung mga ganun. And then you have your capital gain. Pero let's just assume para mabilis. Hindi naman ito tax subject eh. Let's assume that the tax for your gain for this one is 30%. Okay, so 30% of this one will be 3,000. So, ibig sabihin, nung binenta mo siya for 100,000, hindi mo lahat mapapakinabangan nito. The only benefit will be 100,000 less 3,000. Diba? Ayan. So, magkano ngayon? Ano ngayon yung difference? No? That is now what you call your after-tax proceeds from the sale of the old asset. In this case, it's 100 minus 3. So, you will now have 97,000. Okay. Ayun. Okay. What if it's sold at a loss? Siyempre, if it is sold at a loss, no, this will reduce your overall income. If it reduced your overall income, it will also reduce your taxes, and that will be considered as savings. Okay. So, for example, it's sold at, ganito na lang. Let's say that the book value instead na 90, ganyan tayo, no? An old asset was sold at 100,000 and then the book value, let's say, is 110 para mabilis na lang yung mathematics natin. So, meron tayong loss na 10,000 and then the tax for this one is, let's say, 30% and 30% is 3,000. Okay, so aside from the sales of 100,000, you also saved taxes, no, amounting to 3,000. So, kumbaga parang overall natin na cash flow, ayan, coming from the sale is 103,000. Okay, eto 97, eto 103. Nasundan nyo po ito? Ayan, after tax proceeds from the sale of old asset. Okay, kaya siya plus or minus because you have to deduct if it is sold at a gain. Okay, sulat na nga natin. Deduct if it is sold at a gain and then you add if it is sold at a loss. Now, what about your change in net working capital? Bakit siya add or minus? Let's say you bought an equipment, no? By buying this equipment, you were able to, let's say, save, no? Save in terms of a labor, which means you will require lower cash reserves, no? So, kung mas mababa yung required na net working capital mo, okay, it means that you were able to, kung nakapag-save ka, then that's supposed to be added ba or deducted? It will be deducted. Ayan. Or for example, no, by automating some of your processes, instead of using direct labor, ayan, gumamit ka na ng equipment, so bumili ka ng bagong equipment. And by doing that, no, in the operation of the equipment, that will require you, let's say, higher power consumption, there will be setup cost, kaya baka gagamit ka ng additional fuel and supply, so you will be requiring higher levels of working capital in terms of cash. So that will also be considered as part of your investment. Diba? To simplify that, let's say, kunyari, when you commute, no, you just use the jeep or taxi, ganun na lang. Okay, normally your daily allowance is just 100 pesos. But because you decided to buy a car, ayan, which requires fuel, pag minsan you have to increase your pocket money, just in case of emergency, naubusan ka ng cash or nasiraan ka sa daan. Okay, so that additional pocket money can be considered as an increase in your working capital. It's attributable to owning a car. So, ganun din. Okay, dito sa initial investment natin. Okay, if it reduces your working capital, deduct. If you're supposed to increase your working capital, you simply add it. Ganun lang po yung initial investment. Now, here's an example. Let's say you bought an equipment amounting to 380,000, but for you to install that, no, okay, you have to, let's say, prepare the area, ayan, sisimentuhin mo siya, okay, you will install new wiring, okay, so kailangan mo pa siyang i-transpo, yung mga ganon, and it costed you 20,000 pesos. So, your installed cost now for the proposed machine is 400,000 dollars. Now, let's say this is a replacement decision, so you're going to sell the old asset, no? You were able to sell it at 280,000. Okay, now to see the whole problem is found in your material, pero dito yung mga highlights na lang. As you can see, there is a deduction, no? Deduction on tax on sale of the present machine. Bakit kaya deduction sa tax? Well, because this equipment was sold, no, at a gain. Okay, and the gain resulted to a tax of 84,160. So, are you going to take advantage of the entire $280,000? No, you will just take advantage of 195. Ayan, yan na yung net advantage natin. Okay po, bakit? Okay, because napagbentahan mo to but you have to pay this in taxes. So yan na yung neto mo. And then, okay, there will be an increase no in your net working capital because of this decision. Okay, so overall, the initial investment is $221,160. Okay po, very easy to follow. So, sir, what if this is an expansion decision? O you can ignore this part right here, no? You can ignore this part right here pag expansion siya. Okay po, and then you have to review the effect no of this change in the working capital if that is still 17,000. Sir, what if? Sabi na ngayon. Sir, what if this is a replacement but the old equipment cannot be sold, no? Hahayaan na lang nilang itatambak na lang nilang ganun. Okay, so if it cannot be sold, o di automatic, there will be no proceeds from the sale, there will be, meron ba tayong tax? Okay. So, i-record mo ba siya at a loss kapag ni-write off mo? So, you have to review that part. Ayan. Ngayon, kung wala naman siyang effect sa tax, o di magiging zero na rin siya. Okay po. So, ayun. Ano pa yung kailangan nyo malaman? You now have your operating cash flows. These are actually the cash inflows no from the operation of the new asset. Of course, it should also be after tax. Palagi tayong after tax, di ba? After tax. Because tax bias business decision. Yan. Sige nga, i-comment nyo mamaya doon sa discussion board natin. Anong action number yung tax will bias your business decision? Anyway, let's continue. Okay, all benefits expected from a proposed project must be measured on a cash flow basis. So sabi, cash inflows represent money. Take note, money that can be spent. Okay, so not just accounting profits. Okay, so action number 4, di ba? Cash, not profits is king. Dalawang action na yung ina-apply natin dito. Okay, and then kukunin mo pa yung present value ng mga to, no? And when you apply your capital budgeting techniques, anong action yun? That's action number 2. Okay, time value of money. Let's continue. The basic calculation for converting after-tax profits into operating cash inflows requires adding the depreciation and any other non-cash charges, okay, deduction as expense on the firm's income statement back to the net profits after tax. Okay, so in short, ilalagay mo lang or ibabalik mo lang yung mga non-cash charges, okay, which includes your depreciation. Why do we have to add them back to your net profit after tax? Well, because, di ba, these are non-cash items. They reduced your net income but you did not actually pay for them. So one of the common questions na nakukuha ko dito was, sir, why not just ignore, no? Why don't we just ignore our depreciation or other non-cash charges, okay, and then deduct the tax to get the after-tax cash inflows? Well, the answer is we cannot do that. Why? Because your non-cash charges, no, your depreciation, mga ganon, no, will have an effect in taxes. Okay, so by not including them in our expenses, this will actually increase our taxes. So you have to include them in your deductions first. Compute for the tax. Syempre, mas maliit yung tax if there are more expenses, no? You can compute the tax, you remove the tax, and then you add these non-cash charges back. We have an example later. Now, the final step in estimating operating cash inflows for a, take note, proposed replacement, no? Let me underline that. Replacement project is to calculate the incremental relevant cash inflow. Pag sinabi nating incremental, ano ulit ito? These are the differences, no, in our cash inflows. Why? Because our concern is to come up with the change. It's to compute for the change in the operating cash inflow. And that change, okay, yun lang yung i-attribute natin doon sa proposal natin, doon sa decision. Okay po, parang ganito yan eh. For example, no, you're currently earning, let's say, 50,000 pesos a month. okay, here in, let's say, here in Baguio, okay, and then you were offered, no, to work somewhere else, let's say, yung malapit lang, no, yung Dagupan, yan. Malapit ba yun? Let's say malapit lang ang Dagupan. And then the offer is 80,000 pesos. So by accepting that offer, okay, you are going to increase your salary by how much? 30,000 pesos. Yun lang po yung relevant sa decision na yan. Okay? You are accepting the job, okay, because of the additional 30,000 pesos in your salary. Yun lang naman yung relevant. Okay po. Sir, can we also say, ito naalala ko, sir, can we also say we are accepting the job because syempre, ang sasabihin natin ay may salary tayo na 80,000. Oo naman, tama, 80,000, pero not the entire 80,000 is relevant. Now, imagine if you're currently earning 70,000. Now, you compare that with 80,000, the only relevant cash flow now is 10,000. O, di ba? Saan mo i-base yung decision mo? Doon sa salary na 80 or doon sa additional salary by accepting the new job? Okay, syempre, yung additional salary. Yun po yung essence ng relevant cost. Okay? So, ayun, this is now the format in computing for your relevant. Take note, your relevant cash flow is the difference, okay, of the cash inflow coming from the new project or the proposed project versus the existing. Okay, now whether it's old project or new project, this is the format. So you have the revenue and expense. You'll come up with your net income before depreciation. You deduct your depreciation and other non-cash charges, of course. You will now get your EBIT. Okay, you remove your taxes and you will get your net income after taxes. Ayan yung normally na binibigay sa atin. Ito yan. So, to get your after-tax cash flow, you simply add back your depreciation. Okay, so ito yung sinasabi natin kanina. You cannot come up with a shortcut by ignoring your depreciation. Bakit? This one will affect the taxes. Ayun. So you do this for your existing project, okay, and then for the proposed, and then you get the difference. Okay, so by applying this, kunyari, in-apply mo to sa old, in-apply mo to sa new. Kunyari, ayan, to check the original problem, medyo mahaba kasi, okay, you simply go back to your module. Ayan. So this is the proposed machine. Okay, if this is an expansion decision, you don't have to consider this, no? Okay, you don't have to consider this kasi existing pa rin naman yan. But for a replacement decision, you have to get the difference of the two. So in capital budgeting, okay, what you are going to submit to present value computation will be the difference. Siya to. Because these are your relevant cash flows. Okay, that because of the new machine, okay, your cash flow will increase by 26, 57, and so on and so forth. Okay po, so ganun lang po siya kadali. Madali lang pero matrabaho. Especially if what is given to you is instead of the after-tax cash inflow, what is given to you is your yearly revenues, yearly expenses, and so on and so forth. So you have to compute that every year. Okay, for the old, no? And then you do the same for the new, and then that's the time you get the difference. Okay po? So, ayun. Now, let's go to your terminal cash flow. Your terminal cash flow is actually the cash flow that happens, no, at the end of the project's economic life. And this one is related to the liquidation. Pag sinabing liquidation, yan, pag binibenta na natin. Okay? So, ano yung kailangan mong tandaan? It happens at the end of its life. It results from liquidation, and it should also be after tax. Ayan. Now, in the in the sales of this asset at the end of its life, it may result to gain or loss. So, ganun na naman, if it resulted to a gain, kailan ba nangyayari yung gain? If the proceeds is higher than the book value, syempre, meron tayong additional taxes. And that tax will be treated as a deduction from the proceeds. Okay. Ayun, nandito pala yun. Tadaan! Okay. If it's sold at a loss, okay, that is when the book value is higher than the net proceeds. Okay, the loss will result to tax savings or deduction in tax. Therefore, the tax will be an addition to the proceeds. Okay. And then, for replacement decision, you get the difference. Ayan. Dun sa old and new machine. We'll have an example. Ito pa pala. And when we calculate the terminal cash flow, the change in net working capital represents the reversion of any initial net working capital investment. Parang ganito yan, dati, your pocket money is just 100 pesos. But when you decided to buy a car, your pocket money is now at least 500. Ganun lang para madali. 500 pesos na lang. But then at the end of its life, binenta mo yung car. So, you don't need a pocket money of 500 pesos na. You go back to 100 pesos. So, that change, yung additional 400 at the beginning, which is added to your initial investment, that 400 will now be released at the end of its life. Okay? So, that will also be considered as a cash inflow naman. We'll have more discussion later pag nag-comparison na tayo sa net working capital. Kasi may common question dyan eh. Anyway, let's continue. This will show up as cash inflow due to the reduction in net working capital. With termination of the project, the need for the increased net working capital investment is assumed to end. Okay, so this is now the format in determining the cash flow. Again, if we are just computing for the terminal cash flow for an expansion decision, dagdag asset lang, ito lang yung consider natin. But if we're talking of replacement, you also have to deduct the after-tax proceeds from the sale of the old asset. Okay? Plus or minus, of course, the change in the net working capital. Now, take note of this. Okay? Why is this plus or minus? Ayan. Kasi, yun nga, if it is sold at a gain, okay, then your tax will be deducted. If it is sold at a loss, the tax will be added. Okay? So, ganun lang naman po siya kadali. Paulit-ulit lang. Okay, so balik na tayo dito sa working capital. May question kasi, Sir, yung kanina, yung 17,000, let's go back. So, etong 17,000 na to na dinagdag natin. Dinagdag natin doon sa initial investment. How come? When we compute for the terminal cash flow, how come idadagdag na naman siya? O di parehong dinagdag na. Okay. Akala ko ba dagdag sa umpisa? Yan because it is a cash outflow and then deduction sa inflow sa end. How come it's added? Take note, okay? Take note, it's added because it will result to an increase, increase in your working capital. And we are talking about cash inflows. Kanina, the initial investment is a cash outflow. Ayan. So, kumbaga, pagdating sa mathematics, sa umpisa, parang naibawa siya. Okay, in computing your net cash flows. Dito, sa dulo, idadagdag mo siya. Why? Because it's now considered as an inflow. Okay? So, to summarize, okay, it is an increase in your working capital is an outflow at the beginning of the project and an inflow at the end of the project if it will be released or if it will be reverted back to the free portion of your working capital. Ayan. Okay, in other books, okay, basta basta na-release and available for operation or for investment. Okay, yun yung mga ginagamit nilang terms. It means that it's already considered as an inflow. Ayan. Outflow sa umpisa, inflow sa dulo. Kapag, meron yung word na kapag kapag marirelease siya. Okay, so eto yun, pag binalikan mo yung problem, okay, the new asset will be sold at, it can be sold at 50 but it will result to a gain. So, may tax ka na 12. So, ibabawas natin yan. While the old asset will be sold at 10, okay, and it will result to a tax, no, na 40. Siguro it was sold at a gain na naman. Ayan. Normally, nangyayari ito kapag wala ng book value pero naibenta mo pa siya. That's why the entire proceed is considered as a gain. So, pwedeng mangyari yun. And then, you have the net working capital. Okay, so, your total cash flow now will be 49,000 pesos coming from the liquidation. Okay po, so ayun, and we are almost done. To summarize, okay, what are your relevant cash flows? These are the difference in your cash flows coming from the old asset, okay, versus the new asset. Okay, there are only 3 for capital budgeting techniques. You have your initial investment, you have your cash flows from operation, and then you have your terminal cash flows. Okay, so ayun, and that's it. Thank you po sa pakikinig.